You are listening to Business Talk Podcast. I am your host Deepak. We are honored to welcome Dr. Pranav Jindal, Associate Professor of Marketing at the Indian School of Business, as our esteemed guest on today's podcast episode. Dr. Pranav is a globally recognized expert in pricing, Salesforce management, sales compensation, and behavioral economics. His research has been widely published in premier academic journals such as Marketing Science, Journal of Marketing Research, Management Science, Journal of Marketing, and Quantitative Marketing and Economics. He currently serves as an associate editor at Marketing Science and sits on the editorial boards of several leading journals. In 2024, he was named as MSI Scholar by the Marketing Science Institute, an exclusive recognition awarded to outstanding marketing scholars worldwide. At ISB, Dr. Jindal teaches marketing analytics, behavioral economics, product marketing, and marketing strategy. Known for his rigorous yet engaging teaching style, he emphasizes data-driven decision-making and the practical application of analytical tools. His excellence in the classroom has been recognized with several awards, including ISB's Professor of the Year and the Star Teacher of the Year at the University of North Carolina. Professor Jindal holds a PhD and MBA in marketing from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and a BTech in Industrial Engineering from IIT Delhi. With over a decade of research experience at leading US universities, he brings a global lens to marketing strategy and deep insights into consumer behavior across diverse markets. His work in structural conjoint analysis has earned him international acclaim, and he frequently consults with firms in sectors such as retail, B2B, and insurance on pricing and sales related strategies. In this episode, Dr. Pranav Jindal offers valuable insights from his research focus, motivating the frontline, optimizing Salesforce management, and sales compensation, exploring how thoughtful incentive design and behavioral understanding can drive Salesforce performance. So, without further delay, let's welcome Dr. Pranav Jindal to the podcast. Dr. Pranav, thank you for graciously accepting our invitation. It's an honor and privilege to have you today.
No, thank you, Deepak. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It is an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the generous introduction. I am very excited to have a conversation with you here today about sales compensation, understanding how we can optimize it, how we can motivate it, the front line. So, looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Dr. Jindal, what in your view are the core psychological and structural factors that drive motivation in high performing sales forces?
Sure. So if you think about Salesforce in general, there are a lot of factors which can be used to motivate them. But to me, if I think about the top factors, I would say compensation, definitely one of them. And compensation over here could be both monetary and non-monetary. So for example, cash, bonuses, fixed pay, variable pay, and non-monetary compensation, which you could think about gamification, tokens, rewards, products, which are given for reaching certain goals. So compensation plays a big role. In addition to compensation, salespeople can be motivated using recognition. So social recognition, we are all creatures of a community. We belong to a community, we live in a community, we care about what others think about us. So that recognition goes a long way. And then finally, if I think about motivation over here, the organizational structure, the way the organization is set up, the way teams are set up, reporting structures, location, all of those can motivate salespeople. But that last part about organizational structure and location, those are different because some of those the organization may not be able to change readily, whereas compensation, recognition, those are things which are levers under the firm's control and can be changed more easily.
Very insightful. Professor, can you share examples from your research or consulting where these factors were especially evident?
Absolutely. So let me start with compensation, right? When we think about compensation, salespeople can be paid either in through a fixed pay or through a variable pay, and the variable pay would be tied to their performance. Right now, a lot of my research looks at variable pay, which is how do salespeople put in extra effort, generate extra sales when there is a variable pay component, which could be a bonus. Typically, we use the term quota bonus, which is there is a target set for you. Let's say the target could be 10 lakh rupees a month. And if you reach that target, you will get some additional commission. In my research, I look at settings where consumers negotiate or there is bargaining. So the important part is not only for the salespeople to reach the quota, but also to understand what prices they sell the products at. I have multiple papers in this area. In one of the papers, we actually show that when salespeople get closer to their quota to generate or earn that variable pay, that bonus, they end up giving bigger discounts. In another paper, we look at the importance of pricing incentives, which is compensation given to keep the margins high. How does that play a role relative to, for example, the quota bonuses, which are typically given out?
Sales compensation plans often involve trade-off between simplicity, precision, or between fixed and variable pay. How do you recommend navigating this trade-off in a real-world settings?
Sure. Deepak, that's a loaded question, a very complex question. So let me start out by saying that, the ideal compensation plan varies from company to company. I wouldn't even say industry to industry. It varies from company to company for a lot of different reasons, right? First of all, companies work in different verticals, different industries, meaning they have different types of people who work there. They sell different types of products. The sales cycles are different. If you think about B2C companies, somebody walks in, they buy a product, they leave. So you could have monthly cycles. Whereas you think about industrial goods, the sales cycles could span over months, if not years. So really, there is nothing such as one ideal plan which fits across companies. So each company has to choose a plan which works for them. But then we come to this question of the trade-off between simpler plans and more precise plans, right? The trade-off between simplicity and precision. So yes, simpler plans are easier to understand, right? Now, we as researchers often think that, okay, for salespeople, simpler plans might be easier to understand. But really, my interaction with salespeople, the one thing it has told me is salespeople are extremely smart. You give them a very complicated plan, they will figure out how to go about that plan, how to make that plan work for them. So when I think about a simple plan, I don't think of a simple plan as simple for the salespeople, but I think of it as a simple plan which is easy for the organization to manage. Right. So that is where the simple plan comes in. Precision, of course, in an ideal world, we can create a plan tailored to each salesperson. But that then gets into issues about equity, issues about fairness, and more importantly, issues about fairness, right? Or implementation. So all of these are considerations which a firm has to look at when thinking about a plan which has simplicity versus precision. Similarly, you asked about fixed versus variable pay, right? Again, there is no magic sauce over here, right? There is no secret recipe. It really depends on the type of salespeople that you have. If you have salespeople who are extremely risk averse, salespeople who are in a setting or an organization where they're happy to be complacent or can be complacent, then fixed pay is a way in which you will have those salespeople stick around. However, if you're in an industry where salespeople are extremely motivated, salespeople want to perform well, they want to earn those bonuses, the company might have lower fixed pay but create higher variable components. Right? So again, the trade-off between fixed and variable depends on the industry that you're in, depends on the type of salespeople, depends on who the customers are.
Dr. Pranav, in your consulting work, have you observed any unintended consequences of poorly designed sales compensation systems? And what lessons can be learned from such cases?
Sure, absolutely. So, Deepak, let me start out by saying that firms set up these compensation contracts to improve their profits, not only improve their profits, but in some sense they care about salespeople as well. If you think about salespeople, however, yes, they care about the firm's profits, but for the most part, salespeople care about their own commissions. Right? The unintended consequences come in when there is a misalignment between the firm's profit and the salesperson's commission. Meaning, what the firm wants the salesperson to do is less optimal for the salesperson. The salesperson does something which benefits them. I'll give you two examples, right? One of the practices which is very common in the sales literature and sales practice is ratcheting. Ratcheting essentially means that salespeople have a quota. And when they meet that quota, so think about the same example, which is, you have to reach a goal of 10 lakh or sales of 10 lakh rupees in a month. Now, once you do this month, your quota for the next month is going to be ratcheted up. If you meet the quota, I will set a quota of 11 lakhs. I will set a quota of 12 lakhs. What do salespeople do then? If the salespeople are in the last week and they realize that they are going to meet that quota of 10 lakh, they don't want to go above that quota too much. Why? Because that will adjust their quota for the future. So salespeople essentially defer the sales, which could happen this month, to early next month. So they're gaming the system over here, right? And the same way, if salespeople are not going to reach their quota, then to make sure they reach the quota, they are going to bring forward sales by offering big discounts, right? So two examples, one of ratcheting, the other one over here where salespeople give bigger or smaller discounts depending on whether they're going to meet the quota or not. Both of these, and I have papers on this, on the second one, essentially, we show that both of these strategies or either of these strategies hurt the firms.
How can firms design incentive structures that not only drive short-term sales, but also align with long-term customer value and retention?
Sure. So again, the answer is in the question itself, right? When you say design compensation structures which not only lead to or drive short-term sales but also long-term customer value, we have to think about those aspects of the compensation scheme which align salespeople's interests in the short term as well as their interest in the long term, right? Now, if you think about in the short term, yes, salespeople could game the system to do what gives them the highest profit in the short term. But that may not be aligned with long-term customer centricity or customer value creation or retention. This is where the long-term aspects of the compensation come in. As an example, you could have short-term quotas, which are quotas given out every month, right? Or quotas to reach certain targets every month. These are short-term goals. But also, you could have a long-term goal where if in the year the salesperson meets the quota every month or meets a certain annual quota, they get some additional commission. Now, when you put quotas over a longer period of time, salespeople no longer are incentivized only to focus on one small period or 1 month. Salespeople now have to worry about the entire cycle, right? Another example, if you think about, I'll give you an example of, in bank setting where loan officers give loans. They could give loans to what we call our lower quality people or people who are more likely to default. And when they give those loans, for the bank, it is not ideal because those loans default and the bank gets hurt, right? So a long-term orientation over here would be to incentivize salespeople or the loan officers not only on acquisition of loan, but also on the maintenance of the loan. Right. So now we give them money for acquiring loans, but we also give them money for making sure those loans are not defaulted upon and they're in good standing. Right. Doing so now aligns the salesperson's goals and the firm's goals, not only in the short run, but also in the long run.
Professor, to what extent should sales performance be measured quantitatively, like revenue or units sold, versus qualitatively, like customer satisfaction and relationship depth? How can this be balanced in compensation plans?
Sure. So in an ideal world, one would argue that, we should care about both the quantitative aspects, which is revenue, units sold, and perhaps also think about customer satisfaction, relationship depth, and so on, right? But then you have to question, what is the firm's objective? The firm's objective is to create value and create value for the customer, which in turn leads to higher profits. So if you ask me, the firm would ideally like to create profits, and profits not only in the short run, because that is where you could forget about the customer, but long-term profitability requires you to have a customer orientation. If the firm can align the salesperson with its long-term profit orientation, then one may question, why do we care about from the salesperson's perspective, not the firm's perspective, but from the salesperson's perspective, commission based on customer satisfaction or relationship depth in the short run. Now, that is one part of it. The other part of it is there is a measurement problem, right? Units sold, revenues, prices charged, all of these are very easily observable. Customer satisfaction, relationship depth, these are more difficult to observe. Not only are they more difficult to observe, but they're also built over time. So attributing these to a single salesperson is extremely tricky, right? Ideally, we would like to compensate salesperson on their effort. Effort, however, is unobserved. We don't see effort. We don't see how many hours somebody put in, or even if we see the hours, we don't know qualitatively what did they do with those hours. So in the absence of that information, we create compensation plans based on outcomes which we can easily measure. Focusing on customer satisfaction and relationship depth will dilute that objective because of measurement issue and attribution issue.
How do regional or cultural differences shape the effectiveness of sales incentives? Could you share any contrasting example between market like India and the US?
Sure. So again, cultural differences drive a compensation plan, right? Or effectiveness of sales incentives. And very simply, I mean, think about, we talked about the recognition part, right? In a country like India, for example, people really care about recognition. Recognition is extremely important, right? So in a country like India, we could have compensation plan where we have sales contests. These contests could be essentially competitions where salespeople could get on a leaderboard depending on their performance. That leaderboard is for everybody to see, right? It is only because of the sense of belongingness to the community and you care about what others think that social recognition works really well. In countries where social recognition is not given that much importance, or companies which are countries which are more individualistic, for instance, the importance of social recognition will be lower, meaning salespeople are more likely to weigh the fixed pay component or the compensation part of it. Right? Again, you can think about the difference between fixed pay and variable pay depending on the salespeople's propensity to take on risk. And again, there are differences across cultures, across countries in how risk-taking people are. So depending on their risk-taking appetite, we could either have a compensation plan which only has fixed component, or we can have a compensation plan which only has variable pay component. I have seen both of them in organizations, and these are B2C organizations where they're selling home appliances, furniture, other home goods to consumers. Instances where the compensation is either totally fixed or where it is totally variable, right? Just depends on culture and country.
Dr. Jindal, what role does behavioral economics play in crafting effective compensation plans? Are there any biases or heuristics you see salespeople commonly fall prey to that plans should account for?
Sure, absolutely, Deepak. And thank you for asking this question. I think behavioral economics has a huge role, and it is only now that we are starting to understand how important behavioral economics is, what role it can play. And I say starting to understand now, not from an academic standpoint, but more from a manager standpoint, right? Because we're seeing more and more implementation of behavioral economics concepts. If I think about salespeople, at the end of the day, salespeople are individuals, right? Salespeople are individuals, they're human beings. So yes, some of these cognitive biases that we talk about, salespeople are also susceptible to these biases, right? Let me give you an example. So let's go back to the setting that I described where salespeople are selling products to consumers, and then there are negotiations on prices. So any big ticket items, you can think about cars, you can think about houses, you can think about home appliances, and so on and so forth. In my research, I have showed that anchoring plays a huge role. So for example, if the firm shows some reference prices and say this is the regular price of this product was 20,000 rupees. Now you're getting it for, let's say, 18,000 rupees. that anchor of 20,000 rupees makes a huge difference to not only the price that is negotiated, but that also plays a role in the final likelihood of sale, both of which go towards impacting the salesperson's compensation, right? Again, when you think about negotiation, there are a lot of behavioral aspects to a negotiation. For example, what is a fair price to charge? How do we divide the surplus, right? Another example I can give you, and this is something, I grew up, my father had a auto aftermarket sales shop. And I remember he was given incentives to sell batteries and car parts. But a lot of those incentives were like products, right? Individual products. You reach this level, you get a product, reach this level, you get a cooler, then you get something, and then there would be a scooter in the end, right? Now, you could argue that instead of offering these separate products, why not have one bundle or one big dollar amount that is being given? Now, what ends up happening over here is we are leveraging, or firms are leveraging, a behavioral economics principle called mental accounting. Through mental accounting, we are creating different accounts or different bins for salespeople to focus on. So they first focus on the smaller gift. They get to that, they say, okay, this is done. I have it in my bag. Now let me think about the second gift. Now let me think about the third gift. So by implementing mental accounting principles, we are able to motivate salespeople to continue selling more and more in the hope that they will get to each of these separate gifts, right? Simple examples where principles of behavioral economics are being used to design monetary and non-monetary parts of the compensation scheme.
Professor, how should companies adapt their Salesforce management strategies in times of technological disruption, such as AI-based lead scoring or CRM automation?
Sure. So I think, Deepak, we should go back and think about what is the role of Salesforce today, or historically, what has the role of Salesforce been, right? And Salesforce is responsible or helpful in acquisition. They're helpful in maintenance, they're helpful in retention, right? So now when we think about the technological disruption, we think about the AI tools, it would be helpful to think about how these tools play a role in each of these stages across the funnel. Let's start with acquisition, right? We can use AI models to better identify customers or prospective customers, to generate new leads and to classify these leads, to prioritize these leads. If you think about companies, especially in B2C context, they may not be able to reach out to all the potential leads they have. One company that I worked with in India had about 1.5 to 2 lakh leads every day. There was no way they could reach out to all of them. They could reach out to 20,000 people at most, or 30,000. So we worked with them to create a model which uses AI-based tools to predict the likelihood of a customer to, or prospective customer to engage. So prioritize customers. That is about acquisition, right? And the same thing holds true in B2B settings as well. Now, when you come to maintenance, the same AI tools can help you by better engaging customers. We can have agentic AI and we can have chat bots to answer customer queries, to help them with their issues. That will help maintenance. And finally, the same tools can be used to understand consumer behavior in detail. What have they been buying from us? Why have they been buying certain things? How can we create different types or personas of customers? And based on that, we can charge different prices, we can cross-sell, we can upsell. At the heart of all of this lies AI's ability to predict demand and to identify opportunities, to identify customers who are more likely to leave and understand how we can retain them, right? These tools are not going to replace salespeople, right? Oftentimes today we talk about the role of AI and people worry about AI as replacing humans. Yes, there are some mundane, low-skill jobs which could be replaced. But good salespeople, the human touch, the connection that they build, the relationship depth, all of those are still valued today. So the AI tools go hand in hand and they support the salesperson. They do not take their job away.
Professor, what are some emerging trends in Salesforce compensation that you believe firms should prepare for in next 5 years?
Sure. So if you think about sales compensation today, we talk a lot about variable pay, we talk a lot about fixed pay, we talk about quota-based plans, we talk about plans which focus on pricing. But there isn't a lot of work on plans which reward salespeople for behavior. So I mentioned that it is important for firms to focus on outcomes. But what happens in scenarios where salespeople do what is expected of them, they put in all of the effort, but for whatever reason, the outcome is not commensurate of effort? Right now, either we say the salesperson is punished because the outcome is not there, which will be very deflating for the salespeople, or we say that we are going to create a compensation where there is some amount of money which is given to you based on your behavior or based on effort or based on a checklist that you have followed all of these steps, right? So behavior-based compensation is something that we could look at. Another aspect that we could look at, and I'm thinking aloud over here, when we think about sales, typically any and all type of sales are bunched together, right? So we say, okay, this is the total amount you should sell. Doesn't matter where it's coming from or who is buying it. It's all the monthly sales. If there was an opportunity or a way to identify regular sales, identify sales coming from repeat customers, identify cross-sell opportunities versus upsell opportunities, firms could create different incentives for salespeople such that opportunities which require more effort, salespeople get compensated more. Opportunities which require less effort, salespeople get compensated less. Doing so will not only align the salespeople incentives with the firm's long-term goals, but will also make sure that the firm is profitable and will also improve customer satisfaction.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question.
Sure.
For leaders trying to reform their sales incentive schemes or systems, what are the top 2 or 3 principles they should keep in mind before making any changes?
So, Deepak, if I think about leaders making changes, the first thing I would ask them or think about is why do we want to make the change? Right? Oftentimes we see a problem, or I shouldn't say a problem, we see an outcome, a symptom of a problem. And we say, this is not good, let us make a change. So instead of having a knee-jerk reaction, it would be helpful to first understand what is the underlying problem and whether there is something which needs to be done or not. Maybe it's not a compensation issue, maybe it's something else. It's a training issue, it's a hiring issue, right? So that is the first part which I would tell leaders when they want to change the compensation scheme. Now, given that we have established that we want to change the compensation scheme, for the leaders, it is important to think about not only how a new compensation scheme will impact salespeople's effort or performance, but it should also take into account how salespeople are going to stick around, right? Which is retention of salespeople. We could come up with a compensation scheme which is very high powered, which motivates really high performing salespeople to do well. But guess what? There are only a few of those salespeople. Majority of them are not that high powered or high playing, high performing, in which case they might choose to go elsewhere. So there are costs associated with salespeople quitting. Now, not all attrition is bad. Yes, if there are very poor performing salespeople, they should probably leave. But then attrition is something which a firm should definitely keep in mind. The third thing which a firm should take into account are unintended consequences of their compensation scheme. You asked me a question about it, and I mentioned that salespeople would like to do things which are in their best interest as opposed to the company's best interest. So, when creating a new compensation scheme, we should make sure that we are not creating loopholes which salespeople can exploit so that they benefit at the expense of the firm. Again, we want salespeople to benefit, but we want that to happen with the firm benefiting, not at the expense of the firm.
Thank you, Professor Pranav Jindal, for sharing your deep insights on the art and science of motivating sales forces. Your perspectives on incentive design, behavioral drivers, and cross-cultural differences has given us a lot to reflect on, especially for leaders looking to align frontline motivation with long-term customer value. Your examples from real-world consulting brought to the theory to life, and I'm sure our listeners will walk away with both strategic clarity and practical takeaways. It's been a real privilege to having you on the podcast. Thank you once again for your time and thoughtful reflections. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Thank you for having me here. It was a privilege to talk to you about Salesforce, about compensation, something which is very close to my heart. I spend a lot of time thinking about these topics, and I'm glad I had an opportunity to share these with the wider audience. So thank you once again. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Professor.